All right, let's take our third step down the path of knowledge. Jumping into Sri Nisargadatta today, he makes three more statements, and I want to spend a little bit of time jumping around some metaphors to help us sort of get a grasp so we can play with these things in our mind a little bit. And then I'm going to end with a couple of forms of art that I think explore this. So hopefully I can fit all of that into just a few minutes. As I only know the contents of my consciousness, and as an outside world is unprovable, all perceivables are in my mind only. The sages say that in the realized state that there is no internal and external, that all of this, the entire known, everything known to us is within us. Swami Vivekananda is famous for saying, I am not in Alameda, California. Alameda is in me. And what was he talking about? What is Sri Nisargadatta saying here? How is this possible? Well, he makes this statement that the outside world is unprovable. And you're like, well, how is that possible? I'm touching it. But you see, you're not touching it. You're getting information through symbols or through some digital medium to your brain that says you're touching something. The source of that information we don't know, because all you're getting is that electrochemical information coming along the nerve cell, you assume. So your mind has created a symbol for an interpretation of that information that's coming in through the senses. For example, your eyes. We've talked about this in other videos, but it's always good to dig deeper on them. Your eyes see light, but that light never makes it to your brain. That light gets encoded into neural information at the back of the eyeball there somewhere, and then travels along a nerve, not in the form of light, but in the form of, electrical information along the nerve cells, and arrives at a section of the brain responsible for interpreting optical data. And so your brain has created a symbol that you call light, right? That's this lightness all around us, a light bulb. You don't actually know what a lit light bulb looks like. You really don't. You've never seen one. You've only gotten the information from the optic nerve, and your brain has interpreted it and created the symbol for light bulb, which is that shining globe that I see. And what I see and what you see, we can never know if we're seeing the same thing. We just assume because we keep calling it the same. But not even that. I can't even verify that you exist outside of my mind. You're just one of the many voices in there talking for the same reasons. Everything is coming in or being interpreted from a signal of a nerve that I don't know where it's coming from. And you say, oh, but it's coming from my ear. But my ear is equally a symbol created by the mind and assigned as the source of sound. We're stuck. Exactly what Sri Nisargadatta says. The outside world is unprovable as such. And it doesn't have any reality. All the perceivables are in your mind. So what does that mean? That means they aren't real. Well, what does that mean? Suppose you're in a dream and you're standing on one mountain and you're looking at 100 miles away another mountain. Now, in the dream, you measure the distance between those mountains. It's 122 miles, let's say. Well, the actual distance has to be less than between this ear and this ear, because that's the distance that the mind can have, right? So those mountains, two mountains, are fitting between your ears at a distance of 122 miles apart. So you see the trick the mind is able to play with information that it garnishes and makes up and gives it all of this relational existence. But it has no ultimate reality. It has no absoluteness to it. It is all relative. All right. If that wasn't enough to take our top of our head off, here's number 2. Transient things only appear and have no substance. That is, that anything you pick up in this world, in time, is going to turn into what? Potting soil. Everything in this world turns into potting soil ultimately. It has no form that is eternal. A rock, a flower, a building, a car, you, me, everything ultimately degrades, decomposes. As the famous Swami Vivekananda says, everything that is composed must ultimately decompose. So we're looking for something that has a nature that is unchanging, and it doesn't exist in the material world. Nothing in the material world is as it seems. And incidentally, that's why they call it illusory. So change is unreal. The unchanging alone is real. What is that unchanging essence of everything? You know, since you can't say a building is always a building, what can you say that a building is? Well, that's a thought. Let's move on here. It's like watching a movie, right? You're watching a movie and the story and the characters are going on before you. You may even be crying in your chair that you believe it's so real. But is it real? No, of course not. It's a movie. What is the unchanging real of a movie? Well, there's a great artist, Hiroshi Sugimoto. He's a photographer in Japan. And he was the one who conceived of this idea of capturing an entire film in a single photograph. That's where we get the knowledge that the fundamentals of a movie is a white screen, a glowing white screen, and the light being reflected off. So he demonstrated that by going into theaters and opening the aperture, I think that's what it's called, the aperture of his camera, or the click time, to open at the beginning of the movie and to close at the end of the movie. And what he found, that no matter what the movie was, no matter what colors it was in, at the end, when he closed the shutter on his camera, the resulting photograph was of a glowing white screen. So that shows us that the unchanging reality of a movie is a glowing white screen, the light, and the screen that reflects it. So, on we go in search of our reality. What changes has no reality. Time and space are imagined. They are ways of thinking, modes of perception. Only timeless reality is, and it is here and now. Okay, now we're going to use this idea of the movie again for just a second. In a movie, like we've mentioned before, there is no movement. The movement is created by your mind. That's what we're pointing at, to show you how susceptible to hypnotism your mind is, and why the great sages have all questioned our perceptive reality. Because in a movie, it's just a sequence of stills. And your mind creates the movement between two still photographs. Not only does your mind do that, your mind creates the story, because there's just a sound track, which again is just digital, accompanying the still frames. Your mind puts them together, supplies its associated emotions, its associated interpretations of what a human being is, what a relationship is, the pain of breakup, the joy of marriage, the happiness of children, the beauty of vacations. All of that is supplied by you. So at the movie, they should pay you because you are creating the movie in real time. They're just giving you still frames and a soundtrack. You are having to provide the story. There's an interesting perspective, but you can think about it. So what is there? I'm always concerned in studies of the path of knowledge, or Jnana Yoga, because it leaves you very dry, making feelings like, well, if nothing's real, then what's the point of going on? If nothing is what it is, what can I do? What gets me out of bed in the morning? And for that, we're going to break the rules of Jnana, break the rules of the path of knowledge a little bit. We're going to add just a little salt of devotion in here. There's a fantastic poem by Rabindranath Tagore. And he says, this poem goes like this, and we'll talk about it here for a second. Who are you, reader, reading my poems 100 years from now? I cannot send you one single flower from this wealth of spring, one single streak of gold from yonder clouds. Open your doors and look abroad. From your blossoming garden, gather fragrant memories of the vanished flowers of 100 years before. In the joy of your heart, may you feel the living joy that sang one spring morning, sending its glad voice across 100 years. So he wrote this poem about this beautiful light in the distant yonder clouds and the flowers that are bright and blooming in the spring day that he's experiencing. And he's saying, what is this going to? What did I see? He knows that in 100 years, his vision before him will no longer exist, and that you and I will be experiencing something different. So in a poem, he sends us the idea of his beautiful day. He sends us that idea of that beauty in the sparkling, or the slanting light falling through the clouds. He finds something beautiful, and we pick that beautiful up 100 years from then, without any of the symbols, without any of the actual manifested reality that he was sitting in and looking at. We have seen that if you open the shutter 100 years ago and close it 100 years later, what you have left is beauty. What you have left is intelligence. What you have left is existence itself. What you have left is bliss or love. There's an old tradition in Zen of Zen monks writing a haiku just before they die that kind of summarizes their view or their experience or their teaching or their idea at death. Is Gizon Zenrai. He died in 1878. I mentioned him in my Sunday lecture. He says that what was all of this? He says, I came and I went. I walked through 1,000 villages. I traveled 1,000 miles. But now it all ends. I go out of this world that I came into. What is the summation of it? And he gives two images, a moon reflected on the water and a flower floating in the sky. So he gave us some more symbols that represent that unchanging reality, that beautiful, that love, that intelligent, the isness of the symbols that we experience through the creation of our mind.